Hey there. Been a little bit. It's February 2nd. Feeling a little sick. Today we're talking about state machines. So I implemented Stay at Home Dev's modular interaction and weapon system into my game. This allowed me to have an easy way of scaling up my game's content because most of it's going to be weapon based. This is probably a really good starting point for me. So that way, that in the future, if I want to add more weapons, it'll be a lot simpler to implement it than to hard code a brand new weapon object. Also, interactions are done in this interaction node that allows me to adjust the hitbox interaction area just so that way I can make it in the future where small objects still have a reasonable size hitbox for it to interact with, as opposed to stay at home devs where it utilizes the weapon mesh, or sorry, the item mesh in order to interact with the player's interaction array. Now, one thing that I realized while implementing this is that without a state machine, my code started to get really bogged down, and not in terms of performance, but like a lot of my functions were just all over the place doing a bunch of checks in order to see if certain criterias were met and to disable certain hitboxes, enable others. Made everything feel so confusing, and it really slowed down my development. Then I remembered state machines, so I started to readjust my code, at least in my weapon module, so that way there were certain states for the weapon: idle, equipped, thrown, and return. Idle state is when it's in the overworld, and that means when it's just kind of laying there, it shouldn't interact with the environment besides the environment interacting with it. Second is equipped. This is when you're able to shoot it or throw it. This is when it's in the player's hands. I also aim to implement a pass feature. However, this is still not seen. I aim to adjust the return code so that way instead of targeting the player that threw it, it instead goes to the player it was targeting. Now, the throw state is where it obviously is thrown after a certain amount of time, then it is affected by gravity. However, depending on your throw strength, which is still not implemented yet, it will continue to fly straight and interact with enemies. Now, on a critical hit, I aimed so that way it would return back to the player in its return state. Now, it kind of works right now. There's still a few bugs. I aim for the return code to interact similarly to God of War's axe throw return. That one always felt really slick, very snappy. I hope to replicate that in the future, but right now that is not my priority because I am shifting focus away from the weapons, and now I want to start focusing more on the player. One thing about that, also doesn't use state machines. So I decided to move over to a new project. Now, currently in this new project, I have a few states for the player. I have idle, walk, run, falling, sliding, and ground pound working. Now, the animation player. The animation player allows me to adjust the player's hitbox and also camera position. This allowed me to implement the sliding mechanic in the game while being able to move under objects and have a visual representation so that way the player isn't really confused whether or not they're in the sliding state or not. Now, I'm aiming to implement a vaulting mechanic utilizing ray casting. After looking into a few tutorials, I realized that there's a good tutorial by a user named Tarakami Dev. Sorry if I mispronounced that. However, he has a video regarding vaulting in the Unity engine, and I feel like even though that it's using a different engine, the ideas are still very much the same, utilizing ray casting and detecting a physical object that's in the way to determine whether or not you can vault it or not. I feel like this could definitely be utilized by me, even though it's using a forward detection and top-down projection to determine where the landing spot and the vault spot is. After I further develop the player controller and make it feel more fun to use, I then aim to implement enemies so that way I can determine whether or not my game is actually fun, because even though the player could feel fun, if the world isn't fun to interact with, then the game isn't really fun, I guess. First, I want to make the player feel very fluid and have, I guess, a Quake feel, Titanfall feel to it when it comes to moving. However, I want it to still have its own identity and not just be a copycat tutorial kitty-esque video game. Hopefully, within the next month, I will be able to show you guys something that's interesting to look at and not just a camera moving in a 3D space and occasionally sliding. But yeah, that's about it. I hope the next video will come out in March 7th or so, but depending on my schedule or how I'm feeling, may be delayed further, but I aim to release another video at the latest by March. All right, take care.